Welcome to the Open Apple Podcast, where we celebrate the Apple II. Whether you're a longtime user, a nostalgic visitor, or a newcomer to the community, join us as we share news and memories of Steve Wozniak's most famous personal computer.
Ladies and gentlemen, a dramatic reading of the poem November by Thomas Hood.
No. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. I've had enough of your poem reading, whatever you want to call it on the show.
Aw, but how else will people know how literary I am?
Oh, how pretentious.
Aw, well, yeah.
Not interested.
You never let me have any fun.
I know. I rule this podcast with an iron fist.
I guess we'll just have to record a show instead.
All right, fine.
On that note, welcome to the Open Apple Podcast, episode number 32 for November 2013. My name is Ken Gagney, and joining me today is...
Who's joining you?
It's you!
Oh, it's me, and I'm Mike McGinnis.
Hi, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing all right, Ken. How are you?
Fine, thank you. Now, this is actually a little bit of an unusual episode due to various scheduling issues. We are recording this 1 week after we aired our October episode.
We might actually want to make a habit of that, or at least moving it closer to, or further away from publishing date. Well, sometimes we end up posting later in the month than we like because, well, we record later.
True.
And this show does take a lot of editing.
Yeah, we are far from flawless radio personalities.
Indeed. I'm just a mush mouth.
And I'm right there with you, buddy. One of the things I loved about community theater for the 7 years I did it was that you always had a script and you knew what to say. And here we're just making it up as we go.
Well, perhaps you should type us up some scripts, Ken.
We could just get on the air and read from a script for 2 hours.
Sure, why not?
And I'll be like, no, Mike, this is where you laugh at my joke.
Ah, ha, 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 ha.
See? That might actually be more authentic than what I get from you now.
No, that's true.
Oh, well. So what's new with you? You're back to work?
Not much. I'm back to work. Started back to work actually yesterday morning, and I'm kind of tired.
Oh, you got out of the habit of working.
A little bit, yeah. I was starting to enjoy the time off, maybe a little too much. But yeah, it's back to work, and more importantly, I'm getting paid again, so that's a good thing. How were things on the East Coast?
Well, a little bit more about you. I understand that you now have a new piece of fruit in your house to go with your apple.
Yes, but we don't talk about him.
Wow, okay.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. Yes, I am the proud owner of a shiny new Apple II Pi card from David Schmenk, and the Raspberry Pi to go along with it.
Wonderful. Are you having fun with those?
It's been a learning experience so far. It takes a lot of work to get this thing up and running, but it looks like it has a lot of potential. It's sort of an open sandbox, I guess, if you want to call it. If you're not the creative type that can sit there and think of a project, hey, I want to make A2 Cloud or something like that, then you might plug it in and go, gee, what do I do with it now? But
right.
If you are a creative hardware or software hacker type, the world's kind of your oyster with this thing. I mean, it really, there's a lot of potential here, I think.
There's so much, in fact, that I actually got a little confused last month about what exactly the Pi is capable of. I know it's a standalone computer, but the way in which it's being integrated with the Apple II, there are so many different ways that it's being done, I was a little bit hazy on the distinction. So Ivan Drucker took it upon himself to send me a helpful summary of what the different tools are. I just want to briefly read to you.
Sure.
A2 Cloud, which Ivan has created, lets you access disk images stored on your Pi from your Apple II as though they were actual disks, kind of like the CFFA 3000 does. Or lets you transfer them to actual disks with ADT Pro. Also lets you log into your Pi's Linux command line from your Apple II so you can switch disk images and download new ones, though you can also do that with any modern computer. A2 Server lets you serve ProDOS files to one or more networked Apple IIgs or IIes. It can run on any computer in a virtual machine or natively on a Linux computer, including a Pi, so it doesn't need a Pi. Apple II Pi, which you just got from David Schmenk, not to be confused with David Schmidt, hi David, lets you use your Apple II keyboard and mouse to control your Raspberry Pi, and provides a neat hardware card for sticking your Pi inside your Apple II itself. Also provides some neat tools for Apple II programmers, which I haven't yet wrapped my head around. And then Ivan closes by saying the big difference between my stuff and Dave Schmenk's is that my stuff is designed to extend the capabilities of a real Apple II, and Dave's stuff is designed to make an emulator running on a Raspberry Pi feel as though it's actually a real Apple II, with all the additional capabilities that emulation provides, plus provide access to the Linux OS running underneath. So they're both different ways of solving a similar problem.
Sounds good to me.
Does that sound accurate to you? Is that your experience with the Pi?
It does, absolutely.
Cool. So thank you, Ivan, for providing that. I hope that clears matters up for some of us. And yeah, I don't have a Pi, but I saw a lot of them at KansasFest, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see even more next year.
One of the things that I'm actually looking forward to doing is I've ordered the latest Lego Mindstorms, the EV3 kit, and as I understand it, you can interface that with the Raspberry Pi, and so I'm looking forward to using my Apple II to program my Lego Mindstorms EV3, sort of like the old Lego card that you used to be able to buy for your Apple II.
Right. Back in the day. That's pretty cool.
Like I said, you can do, if you can think of it and you're able to program and or build it for the Apple II, or the Raspberry Pi, you can probably do it with this setup.
I want to briefly mention that Ivan sent us that feedback via email so that I had to read it to you guys. It would have been awesome if we'd heard it in Ivan's own words, which you can now do with SpeakPipe, which is the tool we're using on the Open Apple website. Just go to open-apple.net, click a button, and your computer microphone will start recording you and will send us a voicemail message that we can play right on the show.
Excellent.
You can also email us at podcast@open-apple.net, as always, as Ivan did.
And of course, if there's anything that you say into your message and then later decide, I don't want you to read that on the air, you just let us know and we'll excise that portion of the content.
Yeah, there have been times when I sent an MP3 to the RCR podcast and they played it on the air, and I thought that was kind of cool because you don't always get to be on a podcast, and it can be considered uncouth to invite yourself, but if you just send them an MP3, they're like, hey, free content, and we don't actually have to talk to the guy.
Absolutely.
Everybody wins.
Right.
But speaking of everybody winning, here's a situation where I did not win. This is something that happened to me in the past month, and that is my MacBook Pro, which I've been using for the last 4.5 years, needs to be replaced. So I had a 1.5 terabyte Western Digital hard drive, or it may have been Seagate, I forget, that belongs in a desktop computer. I bought it by mistake. I thought what I was ordering online was something that was going to go inside a laptop. I never ended up using it. I bought a case for it, an external case, and was missing the power supply and the USB cord for that. So again, I never used it, but I've been cleaning up my apartment in the last couple of months, found this stuff. I'm like, all right, finally I emailed Charles Mang and said, what do I need to get this thing running? He told me what cables to buy. I got it. It didn't seem to work. I think the hard drive might have been dead, but then I'm like, you know what? I'll take the hard drive out of this external case I bought. Maybe the case is bad. I'll plug it into this internal hard drive adapter thing that I bought off ThinkGeek years ago. Plugged in the power supply, plugged into my USB cord on my laptop. And apparently, since this requires its own external power supply, the power supply wasn't quite plugged in all the way or something, and it wasn't getting power from the AC unit. So it tried to draw power from the USB port on my laptop, and it required more power than my computer was able to serve up, and it fried my USB ports.
Yeah, that is a danger of trying to power devices through the USB.
Shouldn't my computer know better than to try to power that device?
You would think so.
So I did, which is why I went to the Apple Genius Bar, and I'm like, I'm sure you just need to reset my SMC or my PRAM or something. And they ran some tests, and like, actually, you need a whole new logic board for $500.
Ouch.
Yeah, so the computer works fine except for that, but I need my USB ports. I can't make backups without it. It's really annoying.
Yeah, imagine.
Yeah, so this computer was actually given to me by Apple for free 4.5 years ago when I had a 2-year-old MacBook Pro that they could not repair under warranty, so they just gave me an off-the-shelf brand new one. So I actually have not bought a computer in 6.5 years. So
time for a new one anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I was figuring I'd get a new one in 2014, but so I'm a little bit ahead of schedule. But I went ahead online, I ordered one, and I want one that's going to last me a long time. My 0.5 gig hard drive is already almost full, so I need a bigger one than that. I'm sorry, 0.5 terabyte, obviously. 0.5 gig is like Apple II size. So I'm getting a 15-inch MacBook Pro with Retina display and a 768 gigabyte solid-state drive.
Great.
Yeah, I'm expecting a big difference in what I'm used to. I think this is going to be a lot faster. It's going to be running Mountain Lion instead of Snow Leopard, which is what I've been on for most of this time.
I'm sorry about that.
Yeah, I'm using Mountain Lion a little bit on the Mac Mini with which I'm recording this very episode, and it's okay, but since podcasting is the only thing I do on it, I haven't really encountered a lot of discrepancies yet. I'm sure once it's my daily OS, I'll be like, what the heck? So anyway, I'm going to have all new hardware. I also need to get a new printer because my printer's acting up, and I dropped my digital camera and the battery case won't close anymore, so I put that on eBay, and I also sold this really old VHS to DVD adapter. I bought a much better one last year, the Elgato Game Capture HD, which I'm using for my Let's Play videos. That cost $150, so I figure I'll get rid of the old one for like $20. It went on eBay for $187.
Is that good or bad?
I don't understand why anybody would pay $187 for an antiquated piece of hardware that can be improved upon for less. But if people want to give me money for my junk, all the more power to me.
Indeed. And it's a good thing that you're a huge YouTube superstar now, racking in the dollars for all those views.
Well, now that we have all the non-Apple II stuff out of the way, why don't we get down to stuff that our listeners actually want to listen to?
Oh, thank God.
I'm Andy Hertzfeld, and you're listening to the Open Apple Podcast.
This month on the Open Apple Podcast, we are honored to have with us a guest that has been long overlooked by this show because both his company and ours have Apple right in the name. Finally, reunited tonight, one night only, is Open Apple with Call-A.P.P.L.E. We welcome aboard Mr. Bill Martens. Hi, Bill.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, pleasure to have you. Bill, you are calling us from Japan, is that correct?
That is correct. I spend a lot of time over here, and it's just one of the habits I have had over the last 25 or so years, jumping back and forth across the water. Gotta love those 10-hour flights between the two countries.
Now, I always thought Call-A.P.P.L.E. was based out of the Pacific Northwest. Is that not correct?
It is. It is. And we are still in the Pacific Northwest. I just happen to spend a lot of time in Japan, but in this digital age where everything can be done online, I could be in the middle of the desert in Egypt somewhere and hopefully still get online.
So if I may ask, what is it that brings you to Asia?
I've just been over here for a long time, and obviously I've played football over here, played in the corporate league here, and it's kind of I guess it's one of those things that grows on you. Having been in a military family, we always figured home was where our hat was hanging, and that pretty much describes my living in Asia.
So that's where you are today, but let's talk about where you were when you got into the Apple II, because you are one of the community's longest-standing members. Tell us about how you got started with the Apple II.
Well, it's kind of a funny thing that I'll even go back further. I started before the Apple. I started on a DEC PDP 11.4.
Wow, that is going back.
I was actually in Germany at Nuremberg American High School, and actually even before that at Ansbach American High School. The military has always had computers far before the public schools did. That then in turn, led into getting computer magazines and just, things like Byte and Creative Computing and a few other magazines that were out there in the late 70s. You always would open them and find, an Apple I, $666, but, there really wasn't much to look at. And then all of a sudden there was the Apple II. And like, oh my God, the Apple II, gotta have one, gotta get one, beg the parents. The parents always say, go buy your own. Geez.
Thanks, Mom and Dad.
Yeah, thanks. I'll save my allowance for 5,000 years.
Exactly.
It's just, my father was the one who got me into it. And, luckily for me, he's the one who, actually put out the money and allowed me to, get started. But, it really wasn't until I started, working as a high school kid, with APPLE where the Apple II really started to take hold in my life. And when I say take hold, I had people like Don Williams coming in the office saying, "Oh, check this out. Here's the very first 128K card for the Apple II." Or, Mike Christensen suddenly saying, "Hey, we got an Apple III." Geoff Morgan coming in the office one morning saying, "Here's a 5 megabyte hard drive. We can throw 140 floppies on this thing." It's experiences like that just really permeated it into my brain that, yes, the Apple II was the way to go. And having, had one and spending all my life on it, trying to figure it out, even all the way through college, I think. It's just one of those things that I just kind of stuck with me. And funny enough, it's still here.
And so are you, sir.
And so am I, amazingly enough. A few other members of our community have come and gone, and sad to say, many of them very good members. But those of us who are still here still are trying to keep the information flowing and making sure that the next generation of Apple II enthusiasts, get everything they need to get started.
Mm-hmm. Now, tell us about Call-A.P.P.L.E. First of all, Apple is an acronym?
Apple is an acronym for Apple Puget Sound Program Library Exchange. And yes, Puget Sound is one word in that case. It's just kind of one of those funny things that Val threw together in a one-page flyer when he first was trying to get other Apple enthusiasts together. Max Cook, who was the Computerland manager, he's the one who told Val, well, put out a flyer. So he did. That one page became Call-A.P.P.L.E. magazine, volume 1, number 1. According to Don Williams, there was probably only a dozen people who actually ponied up the money at the initial meeting. But, the group kept growing and kept growing. By the time I joined them in 1980, it was a group of about 6,000 folks. By the time I left, it was over 16,000.
Oh my goodness.
I had to go back to school, as I say. School can't wait. But the group, continued growing and eventually became 50,000 members. And even when I was there, we were getting people from every corner of the earth. They'd see the advertisement in one of the local mags, or they'd, fly to the U.S. or whatever when they traveled, and they would see our ad. And Val Golding at the time was running a hotline right out of his basement, and he kept running that. And it's amazing. He's talked about some of the places he'd get calls from at 2 a.m. in the morning, but he always answered the phone and always graciously answered the questions as best as he could. If he couldn't, then he was usually on the phone down to Steve and Steve. So we'll call them Steves, the Steves, Woz and Jobs. The fact that he could have that relationship with them at that time differed broadly from obvious later years. It's a funny start. But, it has been something good over the years. The acronym, well, there's been worry over the years here and there, but, we've always come back to it. As you know, from even today, we still use it. And gladly, Woz is all as enthusiastic today about it as he was then.
So what does Call-A.P.P.L.E. do now? Do you still, I assume you don't still have 50,000 members.
No, we generally get about, 5,000 readers a day. And, well, it's not 50,000 members, and actually the distribution of the magazine was well over 100,000 during the 1980s. It's most of what we focus on is providing, users with software discounts, getting things for users that aren't available to anybody else. We still put our magazines up for members. They're available in PDF. Unlike some of our other publications, we actually do put all the magazines in PDF format. Some of our publications, we prefer not to.
At what point did Val step away, and when did you take over, and how did all that kind of come to pass?
Val actually stepped away in '84. There was a little magazine called On 3. You might have heard of it.
What? No.
He actually went to work with them, and then, figured that was probably a good fit because by that time he had been the editor of Call-A.P.P.L.E magazine. He'd also started, Apple Orchard, in coordination with Apple. In fact, if you look in the very early issues, you'll see his name rather prevalently. But Dick Hubert was always the president of APPLE up until 1990. And in 1990, as Don Williams likes to say, he walked in the office and looked at certain people and gave them a little pink letter. And he only kept about 10 people on at that time. Basically, the group had grown to a point where it was starting to spend more money than it actually had. And so at that point, Don Williams walked in and started putting people out the door in order to bring the group back to what it was. Certain assets that the group had were sold off at that time. But Dick Hubert continued running things until 93, and then Norman Dodge took over. And Norman Dodge ran things from 2004 until I started coming back into the picture in 2001. Thankfully, Norman was, I want to say, smart enough to save everything that we had ever produced. And so when I started putting the archives back together in 2001, all of a sudden Mike Ting, who was our member number 2 or number 3, also popped back into the picture, and Val Golding popped back up, and all these people popped back up and said, "Hey, we've got all these materials. Let's put them out. Let's get them, make them available online." Obviously by 2001, the internet was becoming, a pretty, what do I say? It was used by most everybody by that point. Obviously it didn't have the play on the cell phones yet, but, that was coming. And so, it was just natural, since I was leading the, return of the group into the digital age, that I took it on, and, Val just kind of sat in the background and watched, So that's kind of the progression. The group itself has gone through about 4 or 5, different renditions over the year, name changes in, platforms. At one point we even sold Atari machines, which is, why I kind of laugh about something I saw earlier about, Woz and, Bushnell having a discussion. But it's, things like that kind of make me, realize, yes, the Apple was the way to go. I'm glad that I was able to be part of all, that progression, or at least some of that progression. And it's, hopefully what we're doing now is, continuing what Val started.
Well, I think it's safe to say that if you hadn't stepped in and continued the tradition at Call-A.P.P.L E, it probably wouldn't be around today, or at least it wouldn't look like it does now.
No, it definitely would not have. And in fact, when I picked up a lot of the materials from Norman, it looked like, some of the floppy disks hadn't even been opened in probably 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And you do more than just your own magazines. You also have your own Apple II archives. Is that correct?
That is correct. The Apple II archives, or applearchives.com as it's known, sort of came out of a discussion that James Littlejohn and I were having about, well, what is up with all these link sites that just have out-of-date links, or websites that have disappeared? So what we started doing is saying, okay, well, we have to figure out first a categorization. Nowadays there's tons of different magazines or different software collections on the web, but the link sites that unless you do just a plain Google search, which isn't very pretty, there's really not a lot that you can glean from it. Whereas Apple Archives puts it right there. Here's all the Apple magazines. Here's different software projects. Here's different hardware projects. If you want to buy something that's Apple II related, here's the vendors. Different DVDs that are available on the web, either for free or for purchase. Brutal Deluxe has been very famous for putting out DVDs lately. But it's all right there. If you're looking for a site that's disappeared, it's back in behind the link sites. Some of the magazine sites that just have a list of magazines, we've actually gone and created a nice interface for. And Contact is one of those magazines that we've done that for. We also did it for 6502. And a few others where you can actually see the covers of the magazines and click on them. I know Mike has done a lot of work in the magazine realm, and I actually have to blame him for the interfaces that we have, because he's the one who first started putting up the covers when he was doing the hardcore scans.
I'll happily accept responsibility for that.
Well, you got it. It's all your fault. I saw that and I said, that's a good idea. We've got to do it this way, make it clear and very user friendly. I think that's what the Apple II should be about, is making it user friendly.
Now, Bill, what separates your project from some of these other so-called archives out there?
There's a lot of archives. Most of what we put up, we try and get the original copyright owners and say, hey, can we put these up? In the case of 6502 Micro, Bob Tripp actually worked with us in gathering up the final issues of that magazine. And he actually provided those to Kevin Green and others so they could be scanned and then and put them up online. And conversely, when he was doing the new version of
What's Where in the Apple II?
Yes, thank you. What's Where in the Apple II? We were helping him with, checking the data and whatnot. And so that was a share type relationship, but, it's his materials. They're up there with his permission. And we generally do not like to put things up unless we do have the permission. If we cannot find somebody, or somebody's, gone, as far as no longer with us on this earth, then, it's a little hard to seek their permission since they aren't here. But generally, we like to do that first.
So you're not just aggregating content from other sites?
No, that's something that we genuinely do not do. And I know that has been a problem in the community. We do put up an RSS feed for our news. But, the biggest problem is a lot of the work that Brian Weiser and myself, and obviously you over the years, we put in, I want to say hundreds of hours, but it's probably in the thousands of hours in doing these scans and, making sure that the material is out there. And, it's just one of those things. People think that because it's on the internet that it's public domain or that it's free. And most every website that we put up, right at the bottom of the page, it says exactly what the copyright is. And if material's on there, it doesn't mean that it's public domain. It means that it has a copyright. It was done by somebody. Brian created a bunch of brochures for Applied Engineering. They wound up on all manner of site with all the metadata stripped out. And then other people took some of the early Beagle manuals that I had done, right down to the screwed up covers that I scanned from my own personal copy, and put them up as their own work. And, that's kind of a lousy way to do business.
Yeah, it just doesn't feel very good when you find something like that on someone else's site.
No, and especially when there is no credit given. And this is one of the things in working with people like Jim Maricondo and Brian Weiser and other people who have been involved with APPLE over the years. One of the things that Val Golding always kind of stuck in our brains was make sure to give credit. You know, you have to give credit where credit is due, because some of the people who are in the community, that's the only recognition they'll ever get, is that little blurb of credit.
That's a good point.
We're always happy to put it in there. And if somebody wants their copyright specified a certain way on their materials, and they're allowing us to distribute those materials, we put it up the way they want it.
In addition to bringing all these documents and publications into the digital realm, you've also brought a lot of classic Apple II games into the online realm with your Virtual Apple.
That is correct. Virtual Apple, actually, I can't claim credit for creating it. It was created and then left abandoned, and it just sort of, Jim Maricondo and I looked at this and said, hey, you know, if this is gone, this is going to be a great loss. We got to get this back up. As soon as we put it back up, people were just like, oh my goodness, I thought this was gone forever. What we started doing with it, was actually going and approaching people who were the software publishers at the time and saying, is this the latest version of the software? Do you mind if it's up here? Oh, you've got another package you haven't released? You want to release it here? And we have published several packages with Virtual Apple that nobody saw in the 80s. We recently published a package called Shell Shock, which was a online tank battle game where you could battle an opponent over your modem. Obviously, in this day and age, you know, modems are long gone. The game itself is still playable because you can play person against CPU or person on person. If you have your modem set up, great. You probably still find somebody to play it. But it was just one of those lost relics that was never published. And the fact that we were able to get it up there, the documentation and everything, you know, that was something. Now it's there for the whole community to enjoy. And each game that we have up there, we take that same kind of approach. We try and make sure that, you know, we can get it number one, number two. If it's there, if the company's no longer there, well, we leave it there until somebody says, no, you can't do this. And, you know, while that's not my favorite way to do things, sadly, sometimes that's the only way to do it.
This is based on technology from the FTA?
This is based on one Oliver Gogel's ActiveGS emulator, and which most people know is based on kegs. And you know, we've worked for about 8 or 9 years now on making it available on multiple platforms. The problem, number one, the problem is Oliver doesn't have a lot of time to work on it. The second thing is, you know, we tried to have an iPhone, iPad version, which is a wonderful version of the program. The problem that we ran into is that Apple just will not approve it.
Of course, because they don't like emulators.
Well, and we suspect it is the fact that they don't like admitting that the Apple II was their mainstay. I can't say that for sure, but just the fact that they didn't like the Apple IIgs boot up screen in the emulator itself forced Oliver to go back and actually bypass that part in the code. You know, it's just the Virtual Apple website itself, we built that whole thing really offline. And so we're able to control it much more directly. We're able to add and take packages down where they need to be taken down. We've tried to make it kid-friendly so that the schools can use it. We've approached some of the people who used to work with MECC about getting some of their original documentation and notes. And so the site itself is used not just by the hobbyist community, but also by the educational community, which, makes it that much more important to have it up.
Now, Bill, for a long time, you, as far as I'm aware of, were one of the few modern Apple II users to have his own Wikipedia page. But right now, I'm looking on Wikipedia and I actually don't see you. Did your page get deleted?
I don't know. Did it get deleted? Let's see here.
When I punch in Bill Martens, it redirects me to Canada Party candidates for the 1993 Canadian federal election.
That is not me.
No.
Actually, if you look up William Martens, I think you will find it. Yes. Let's see here.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm there.
You're under
yeah,
William.
I'm there.
I've never thought of you that way, so it didn't occur to me to look you up. Now, there is an entire section on this page about your football career. So you go around and you bang people's heads together for a living, apparently. Tell us about that.
I used to say that I mash code and smash mouths. It was quite appropriate because, I've always had a love for the game of football. Sadly, every time I started playing when I was a kid, I was always the smallest guy on the field and, would have one nagging little injury or, as a sophomore, I started turning out for the high school football team and, wound up chipping my kneecap. It was just little things like that. All of a sudden I got to be about 25 years old and, I was no longer the, 6'4" and 170. All of a sudden I was 6'4" and 200 and I thought, time to go back and play football. And I did. And I played for 25 years. Obviously I have a stint there where I have had injuries for about, 6 or 7 years. Basically I sprained the number 2 rib right where it meets the sternum and basically I had the car crash effect for a couple of years, but, I just finished actually playing my last games this year. At this point, I can say I'm glad I'm retired now. I'm not sure how many brain cells I lost because of it. I was quite fortunate in my 25 years where I didn't have too many injuries that were, what we say, career-ending injuries. It was good fun.
And this was all in Japan that you were playing?
It was all in Japan. I played mostly for club teams and played for one of the base teams as well as in the corporate league here, the top division of the corporate league for Unisys. And, after 25 years, I guess I deserve to hang up my cleats.
Now, the stereotype is that the Japanese are shorter than Americans. If that's true, did you have this overwhelming advantage over them on the field?
I think somebody needs to rewrite that stereotype because particularly in the corporate league, I mean, I was facing guys who could have been on any division 1, 2, or 3, football team. Some of these guys are 6'5", 6'6", 270, 280. And, I still only probably weigh about 245, 250. Not the biggest guy on the field. As Ken there knows, probably the meanest, but, it's one of those things when you put on that helmet, you become a completely different person. I think, beast mode is the right moniker for it. But, when that helmet's off, it's, just Bill the Apple geek. Give me my pocket protector, I'd probably fit right in. But yeah, the football was something that, did take, a lot of my life. And, now I have a lot of Sundays where I can play with the Apple IIs again.
Excellent. Well, let's take the Apple II version of Bill on the rest of the Open Apple Show.
Get what's new and exciting in retro computing with 2 News.
Great. Well, I saw this news story back a bit ago. I know Wendell's been working on Apple I related things for a little while, obviously 35 years plus. He's got this nifty little Apple I on his website that's completely clear cased. And there's only been one other Apple I I've seen that was clear cased by Apple I owner here in Japan, but this one has the whole machine there. He's got a modern flat screen LCD and all kinds of nifty additions to the Apple I that, my goodness, I don't think anybody else could ever create. He's got a USB connector and everything else for it now. It's a pretty dramatic change in the Apple I with 32K of DRAM.
And it uses an iPod for program storage.
Yeah, it's just amazing piece of equipment.
I mean, I originally saw that iPod in the photo. I'm like, it looks like it's just resting there on the case. I'm like, maybe he just left it there, but it's actually integrated into his Apple I. It's
integrated into his Apple I, yes.
That's ridiculous.
The keyboard, it's just like, that looks almost like the Apple II.
Yeah, I mean, you're pretty close. I've never known anybody to use an iPod for an Apple II.
Well, actually, there is precedent. There was a guy who did a music video on an Apple II that he actually used, I believe, an iPod to load the music, or I can't remember exactly what it was, but that's the only other instance I know where an iPod was actually used with any Apple machine of that generation.
Yeah, the guys at Panic, which make the Mac FTP program Transmit, they played Jed's Beautiful Ground, the music video.
That's right. Yes.
They loaded the cassette audio into iTunes and plugged the headphone jack on their iPad to the audio in on the Apple II and then played it to load the program in.
Yeah, and the Apple I's no different since it uses the same type cassette interface. I don't see why the iPod wouldn't work. In fact, it'd probably be a lot better than having an actual cassette player there trying to load off a tape. Definitely get more consistent sound level off of it.
I mean, the Apple I didn't come with a case, so people can make whatever kind of case they want. I've seen wooden cases, I've seen briefcases. So I guess a clear case, you can do whatever you want.
I know Val Golding had his in a briefcase, and I've seen others that were similarly set up. I think the most amazing one was the one you guys had at K-Fest this year where it's just on a board there. That's almost kind of scary.
That was actually in a Dell server box. That's how he carried it.
Was it in a Dell server box?
Yep.
Well,
that's how he hit it.
Thank God it was in something.
Yeah, really.
I think they had 5 of them running there in California this year, and it's just like, you don't want any kind of outside interference causing potential magic smoke. That would not be a funny situation, especially since some of these machines now are going, for $500,000 and then some.
So there was another Apple II that popped up in a clear case recently. This was being an Apple IIc.
Yeah, I saw this too, and I just I thought, if you're going to go clear case, why not go clear case all the way? The little bit on the back that they left as the original, what do you call it? They say it's a prototype, but it appears to me like either part of the case was built beforehand or that this was torn down and built as a clear case at some point. I just don't know. That bit on the back kind of threw me.
Yeah, it says in the caption for this Flickr photo set, note the unusual color motherboard named Terry Main Logic, dated the year before the IIc was released.
Yeah, so I believe that part's a prototype, but the case itself doesn't seem to be very prototypish.
I have not seen a blog post associated with this, so I don't know if the guy has done a teardown or a historical investigation into where it came from.
That'd be something to be interesting.
For a while there, you could buy, there were a bunch of Mac SEs and things like that showing up, and there were a bunch of Clearcase Newtons that were also showing up, and they were being advertised for a while as prototypes until I think somebody pointed out that they were actually engineering samples.
Ah.
So maybe that's what this is.
Well, this Flickr user, Jim Abellis, has been a Flickr member since September of 2007. He has 62 different photo albums, almost all of which appear to be various Apple products and prototypes. He has a Newton prototype. He has, this is Jeff Raskin's Apple II, I think, and a whole bunch of other unusual hardware devices. So, an iPad 2 prototype. Maybe somebody dropped it in a bar.
Yeah, they've been doing that a lot lately. And then trying to sue the person who finds it.
Right. So yeah, maybe I'll drop Jim a line, see what the story is. Maybe he's trying to, I don't know, create the next Shrine of Apple or something.
Yeah, he's got quite the collection there. I mean, some of these machines, I don't think people have seen, especially some of these e-mates and whatnot. A clear case e-mate, I've only seen a couple of them, but I think my favorite one down there is actually the backlit Macintosh laptop that he's got there that has a clear case on it. We definitely know that didn't come like that. It just kind of lends itself, in my mind, to the fact that Apple IIc, while the board may be prototype, I'm almost certain the case is not.
Well, speaking of unusual and rare hardware, some of it is actually coming back into manufacture, and that is the Y cable required to use the 2E card in the Mac. Now, JuiceGS had a lengthy article about the 2E card a couple of years ago. I think it may have been Ivan Drucker's debut with the magazine. The 2E card is pretty much an Apple IIe on a card, as the name implies. It allows you to run Apple II software on the Mac. It was meant to be a migration path for Apple II users who are upgrading to the Mac, if you consider that to be an upgrade. But you need the Y cable to use it, and that, for some reason, is harder to find than the card itself. Charles Mangan, who creates the retro connector adapters, also known as Option 8, has created his own Y cables, and they are now available for purchase, starting to ship on November 1st, 2013, for $40.95, plus shipping, which in the United States is another $2.92.
Yeah, that's one item that definitely needed to be reproduced over the years. I see all the time where people are wanting a cable for their Apple II card. Every time you find a package specifically for that, it's all the documentation, but no cable. So he's been on a roll lately. I mean, look at all the different other products he's worked on. The USB interface, the keyboard interface for the Apple II. It's every geek's what do you call it? Dream store.
Yeah. He has been prolific. We should have him on the show. What do you think, Mike?
Nah, not interested.
So let's see, what is next on the agenda? I want to briefly mention some other hardware that's coming out from our old friend, Jerry Ellsworth. She is a KansasFest alumna. We have not seen or heard from her in several years. I think her interest sort of waxed and waned. For a while there it was Apple II, and then it was pinball, and then back in August, I got an email from KansasFest attendee Greg Nelson pointing me to episode 101 of a podcast called The Gray Area Podcast, which featured an interview with Jerry. It seems what she's been up to lately, or what she's been in the news for, was getting fired from Valve. There were a whole bunch of layoffs at the software company Valve, and she was one of the ones affected. She was working in an augmented reality or virtual reality department on some new hardware. And that whole department, it sounds like it got laid off, and that project is no longer part of Valve. And somehow, as part of her dismissal package, she got the rights to the project she was working on. And now she is continuing to work on this project and has brought it to Kickstarter. So this is now called Cast AR. They are asking for $400,000. This project launched on October 14th, which at the time of this recording was 4 days ago. And they are currently at more than $500,000, so the project will be funded. Wow. That's a lot of money for an Apple II user.
And I just looked the day before yesterday, and I think they barely cleared $250,000. So they've cleared almost $270,000 in just 2 days.
Yep.
That's amazing. But looking at that is a really cool project. Google Glass had better stand up and take notice, because for gamers, this is definitely a piece of hardware that most of them are going to want to have.
Oh yeah, and actually the most common backing level on Kickstarter is the $285 pledge level, which is the Pro package, which gets the person the complete set of the glasses, the wand, and all this other software and hardware that comes with it.
Are you not going to pledge the $3,500 tea time with Jerry? Oh, and on that note, about her pinball interest, that's never waned. I don't think that ever will wane. In fact, her battles with another hardware aficionado, Ben Heckendorn, are quite famous. So she's a pinball girl, always will be.
That's true. She did talk about, on the Gray Area podcast, her involvement in this short film called Pinball Donut Girl. Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. But I would not say that she's ever walked away from pinball, but she's been involved in it to varying degrees over the years, to the point where I think she was running a pinball repair shop that she talks about on the podcast. I don't think she's that involved anymore, but you're right. Pinball is definitely a part of her life. I haven't heard her doing anything with the Apple II or the Commodore 64 lately, though.
She also had a Commodore 64 guitar, and I can't remember the exact specifications of that, but it wasn't Apple II, so I didn't look too hard. But she's always got some wacky thing there going along lines of the hardware, and this one is just way cool. I can't wait to see this. We've got to find a way to hook it to my Apple II, though.
Yeah, it's not exactly an Apple II project, but I firmly believe in supporting those who support the Apple II, and that includes Jerry.
Definitely. Jerry's been there since, early on, so.
Several episodes ago, we mentioned that a time capsule had been buried and then lost, that Steve Jobs had contributed an item to. Well, that time capsule has been found. The National Geographic reality show Diggers actually located it, and it turns out that Jobs put an Apple Lisa mouse in the time capsule.
Now, remind me, how was it lost, and where did they find it?
I don't know how it was lost, and it was located in Aspen, Colorado.
Huh.
It had been buried as part of a conference that he attended.
Yeah, and it kind of surprised me that he only buried a mouse. Why not bury something a little more esoteric, that nobody else had? That kind of struck me as funny. $500,000 mouse.
It was probably something that he could throw in his suitcase to get on the airplane.
Well, that's true. Although in those days you could carry 4 bags.
But also, Steve Jobs has never struck me as the most generous individual. Maybe he didn't want to donate anything more valuable than that.
It's an interesting piece, but I wonder why that is the highlight of that whole time capsule. Surely there had to be other interesting things on there.
I'm quite certain that there were, but it's because of the association with Jobs that it's getting mentioned.
Well, what's also about to become a time capsule of sorts is the Steve Jobs garage where Apple was founded, as seen in the...
no.
Yeah, it's iconic. It's been well photographed. Did they actually get the rights to use the actual house in the Jobs movie?
I think they shot in the house, yes.
Wow.
That was my understanding as well.
And now it is under consideration to become a historical landmark. The Los Altos Historical Commission is reviewing a proposal that they received to consider the house of historical significance. So I don't know how long their deliberation period will be, but it's possible that this will become a protected landmark.
I hope we can get more than the 5,000 Apple II geeks in the world to actually go and see it. That just seems like a little bit of overkill. The next thing they'll do is take Steve Wozniak's house that he had the cave built in the basement for his kids with on the same level.
I want them to protect the plane that Steve Wozniak crashed when he was in college.
That's yes, and show a complete version of Sublogic hooked up to it. It's one of his famous jokes. So.
Again, with the film and with the house and everything else about Steve Jobs the last few years, there's been a lot of history in the news lately. We have some feedback on the Steve Jobs film from Steve Wozniak, Andy Hertzfeld, and Dan Kotke.
I know that there was a lot made out of the Jobs movie early on. There was a lot made out of Woz's opinion of the movie. But when I sat down with Woz here in Tokyo, you could almost say he got agitated at the mere thought that people thought he hated the movie. And he said, "What makes you think I hate the movie?" I just looked at him and said, "Well, Woz, this is what everybody's saying." He's like, "I haven't seen the movie. I haven't even seen the script of the movie. How can you hate something that you haven't seen or even seen the script of?" From reading this article, you can see that obviously facts get mixed up over time. And you can see that while these guys are amused by the movie, they were there. They know what happened, and they obviously just kind of go, okay, it's entertaining, but that's not really the way it happened. And Woz was very clear and concise in saying that Jobs was at college when he was working on the Apple I and going to the Homebrew Computer Club. And that one fact is not the way it's displayed in the movie. It's those, him working on it at home and Jobs going, wow. I think I have to put that one in. Good entertainment, good try, but stick a little closer to the facts next time.
Yeah, I think that seems to be the general reaction, is that it's meant to be a movie, not a documentary.
Yeah, but they try to portray it as a documentary, and I think that was just the wrong approach with that movie.
This recent feedback from Woz, Hertzfeld, and Kottke came on a Mountain View, California local access TV show called John Wants Answers, hosted by John Vink, who himself worked at Apple 96 to 2012 and now works at Nest Labs, which I believe is the thermostat company. But anyway, this is actually quite a lengthy article that talks about a lot more than just the Jobs film. It also talks about the history of the Mac and whether or not it was considered a success or a failure by Apple. Definitely worth a read. We'll link to that Cult of Mac story in the show notes. Continuing on with our Woz Chats with People theme, we have Woz chatting with Nolan Bushnell, the founder of Atari and Chuck E. Cheese, two companies that both went bankrupt. Of course, the connection there is that Steve Jobs worked for Atari, and it was Steve Wozniak who saved Steve Jobs' bacon when it came to making the Breakout game. Woz and Bushnell held an hour-long talk at a technology conference in San Jose, California, and they talked about, based on this Mac Rumors story, almost exclusively Steve Jobs again. He's apparently the only thing worth talking about in the Apple history world. They talked about what Jobs contributed or didn't contribute to Atari, whether he was skilled at soldering or not, and how much money Jobs was looking to get to sell Apple to Commodore, which obviously didn't happen. But again, already history is being obscured by inaccurate memories, and it's interesting to hear these two different sides of stories about Apple's history, Steve Jobs' skills, and the like. I also just wish people would stop talking about Steve Jobs so much.
Well, you're not the only one, but a funny story about that line is one of the photos I took in 2002, December of 2002, of Steve Jobs. I was talking to Dominique Goupil, who was the CEO of I want to say FileMaker Claris at the time. Steve didn't look all that well at the time, and I said, "Hey, Dominique, is he okay?" Dominique seemed to think that Steve was just tired at the time. Obviously, that has gone on not to be the case. He actually 10 months later told the world he had pancreatic cancer. But now that he's gone, people just act like he was the god of computing. And in a way, I feel sorry for Woz, because it's like, here's the guy who really created Apple Computer. If it wasn't for him, like you said, he saved Jobs' bacon on Breakout and really created the machines that we know and love. And to kind of treat him as I won't even say second tier, maybe third or fourth tier person in the whole scope of things, I think that's not right. People got to give Woz more credit and bring Jobs back down from the real god that he supposedly is.
Well, Business Insider is definitely giving Woz credit. They published a story recently on 8 reasons why Woz still matters, which I think is just a great idea, because I'm horrified by the people who either don't know who Woz is or they only see him as the Apple II guy, and there's so much more to him than that. Some of the headlines here on why he matters is not only the Apple II, which is one of them, but he produced the first universal programmable remote. Here's something I had no idea about. He helped found the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It says he was one of the 3 people who provided the seed money for the group back in 1990.
Yeah, but he's done that with a lot of groups too. I mean, he's always backed things that I found out about Jerry Ellsworth's project from him, because he's one of the backers of the project. The guy's amazing to talk to him. He has all these different interests that go so far beyond engineering in the hardware realm. And people don't realize that. One of his famous projects, which he called Wheels of Zeus, that was purely to keep children safe. It was a GPS tracking system that he came up with to basically keep kids safe. That has nothing to do with Apple, nothing to do with, you probably could put it on the iPhone these days, the tracker, but it just shows, and even really back in the 80s too, is interest in the music realm. We always give Jobs the credit for that, but I think Woz should be right there with equal credit.
Regarding what you were saying about Kickstarter, I'm Facebook friends with Woz, which allows me to get an email notification every time he backs a Kickstarter project, and he backs a lot of stuff.
Yeah, he does. He does.
So it's not just investment firms and capital investors or whatever that he's founding. He's putting his own money out there.
That's right. That's right.
I think he lost several $1 million actually funding that US festivals, those 2 music
festivals. That's right. He did. He lost something like $25 million, which at the time, was a gargantuan amount of money.
And it was interesting when he was at KansasFest and they did a Q&A after Randy's keynote. He was talking about it and just the passion that he had for that project in particular was interesting to hear. I mean, he teared up when he started talking about it because it was such an emotional, moving experience for him.
Another product that we're actually producing and I've put out before called the WOZPAK DVD. In that DVD, he talks about that. He talks about it being enthusiastic and preparing to do the US Festival. The fact that that was an interest of his. It kind of shows that people put him in a box and there's no place that he actually can fit in that box.
I'm still kicking myself that I forgot to bring my US Festival poster to have him sign.
That would actually be a severe rarity.
Well, with any luck, he'll be back at K-Fest in 2014.
Fingers crossed.
I want to mention that Business Insider ends their story with the 8th and final reason why Woz matters. I'm going to read this verbatim. The headline is, "All the evidence says Wozniak is an all-around nice guy. In basically all anecdotal Wozniak stories, the takeaway is the same. He's down to earth, humble, and will even wait in line with regular Apple customers to buy the latest gadgets." End quote. And that's something that Kevin Savitz put very elegantly on the Antic podcast, talking about Woz at KansasFest, how Woz would just be very attentive and listen quietly while people gave presentations about the machine that he invented. And I thought that was just so respectful of him, and it's so cool that he can be in the audience just like the rest of us.
I have to concur on that. You know, all my dealings with him have been absolutely, you know, he sees you, he knows who you are, he remembers your name. When he talks, it's not pretentious, it's not what we would say uppity. He's just a really nice guy, and he's really giving of his time. You know, if you look at the people around the globe who've actually spent time with him, it's amazing that he actually takes those moments to spend with those people. He's the founder of a company that's a multinational conglomerate. Most of us haven't gone to that level yet. But honestly, I have to concur. The guy is a nice guy, and I'm honored to actually have been able to interact with him because he is really a nice guy. Even
to us pixel-stained techno-peasants.
There's a good expression for it.
Now, a Kickstarter project that was, to my knowledge, is not yet actually backed, but is involved with, is a Homebrew Computer Club reunion. This is occurring on November 11th, 2013, regardless of the Kickstarter. And they're going to get back together as many surviving members of the group as they can, including Steve Wozniak, hypertext pioneer Ted Nelson, and homebrew moderator Lee Felsenstein. So this is something that's been done before, and it was not open to the public. This time it is going to be open to the public, and the goal for the Kickstarter was $16,000. They are now at $36,000, and I think one of their stretch goals was to have the event videotaped and added to archive.org. I don't remember off the top of my head how much they needed for that stretch goal. It's not listed in their text, but I think they're probably going to meet it. The funding goes on for another couple of weeks until the end of this calendar month. And like I said, they are already 20,000 over. All their pledge levels are basically binary values like 4, 64, 128, 512. But all the pledge levels above $4 are now taken because those included like tickets to the event and the like, and they had a limited number of that. You can still donate as much as you want, but the only reward you're going to get is a postcard after the fact, and you only need to spend $4 for that. So the $4,096 level, where you get 8 tickets and your company logo in the event program, there were 3 backers for that, all gone. Same with 2,048, 1,024. So this event will be happening, and it should be a good time. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're not going to be able to go. And I actually did just find the text. It's $30,000 for pictures from the event to be taken by a professional photographer, licensed under Creative Commons, put on the Internet Archive. $40,000 is a micro-documentary that will be shared under the same circumstances, sent to backers 2 weeks early. So I would go ahead and pledge that $4 to get your postcard, and then you'll get a 2-week head start on the documentary, which, at the rate that this fundraising is going, will happen.
Yeah, this is amazing. You know, it shows how much interest there is in all those people, you know, and that era. Look how many people are interested in things like Captain Crunch, you know. John Draper there, you know, even Woz mentions him quite frequently these days.
Speaking of Captain Crunch, I had a great experience with the undergraduate class I teach in Boston the other night. I don't even remember how we got on the topic, but we were talking about how modems work and acoustic couplers like used in War Games by Matthew Broderick. And I told them all about John Draper, aka Captain Crunch, and how the whistle in the serial would produce the right frequency or the right hertz. And then I told them how you can basically just hold up to a landline a recording of a phone number being dialed, and that's what the phone recognizes. You don't have to actually push the buttons. You just need to hear the tones. And so I played the sound of a modem being dialed, and one of my students raised her hand and said, "So how come when you played that sound and we could all hear it, all our cell phones didn't start dialing that number?"
Oh, the analog days.
Well, on the surface, that's actually a good question, because I had just told them that phones listen to the sound of a phone being dialed and will dial it. And based on just that one fact, why wouldn't a cell phone work the same way as a 1970 landline? So I told them it's a slightly different technology you guys are using now.
You know, it's interesting that you'd mentioned especially the hacking and the blue boxes and things like that. The Esquire magazine article, Secrets of the Little Blue Box, which I think Jobs credited as kind of his idea and was as well for doing that, was republished on the web last year. So that's out there if anybody wants to read it.
Oh, excellent. So Homebrew Computer Club is happening, and another gathering of classic computer users just happened, that being VCFE, and that's not East, that is Europe.
Hans Frank took a bunch of photos of the gathering and posted them on his Google Plus page, and you can check them out.
Hans Frank was also at K-Fest when I was there.
Yeah, he showed up a couple of times over the years.
Yeah, so that must have been 2003 that he was there.
That's right. And, you know, he's I guess on again, off again in the vintage community. Every once in a while his name pops up with some project. VCFE, I know he's tried to put that on from very early on. And with the wane of VCF in the U.S., and I say wane, some of the events are still very strong and others have gone by the wayside. One would hope that he's able to continue that, because I think that's something that needs to be out there. We need to have an event for the younger generations to be able to see these computers. And like you were talking about acoustic couplers, I mean, we use those in old ASR 133 teletypes when I was in school.
Yep.
That kind of thing just, you know, you're kind of glad it went by the wayside, because there were days where you would want to bang your head against the wall and using it. But for the technology of the time, it was what we had. It does dredge up some fond memories, but I'm happy it's a lot easier to get connected these days.
Boy, me too.
I'd hate to be going at 110 baud these days.
Although, on the other hand, I do think sometimes life goes a little bit too fast.
This is another thing that's very true. We all want to go faster and faster, bigger machines, faster machines, more RAM, faster hard drives. We got to have the fastest SSDs now. And well, it's, I think Moore's law also at some point actually was broken, but still pretty much applies to the human condition.
Well, we could do a whole podcast on just that, but let's bring it back to VCFE. To give that some context, VCFE 14.0 was held in late April of 2013, and they have announced that the next one will be held May 3rd and 4th of 2014. Details are in the show notes. And also on my own coast, Vintage Computer Festival 9.1 is happening April 4th through the 6th. They had to cancel this year's event, which would have been 9.0, due to damage from last year's Hurricane Sandy. So rather than skip 9 or make it 10 or whatever they're going to call next year's 9.1, and it's going to be held in April. So check that out. It's in Wall Township, New Jersey.
And one last VCF news item here. VCF Midwest happened again in Chicago this year. And there's a Facebook page for it and a twitter.com/VCF Midwest. You can read all the details.
So VCF is a great place to get your hands on some classic hardware, but there's one gentleman, Jonathan Zufi, who has been collecting the hardware on his own, and for the last 4 years or so has been photographing it for his website called the Shrine of Apple. I remember when this popped up 4 years ago, it just kind of showed up overnight, and all of a sudden there were these high-quality photos of classic Apple gear, really good quality stuff. Well, he has continued to expand that collection, and now he is taking the best of the best and adapting it into a coffee table book. The Shrine of Apple is now a hard copy book called Iconic. It is divided into 6 chapters. It looks back over 35 years of Apple and includes over 150,000 photos, which is fantastic because there was a book a couple of years ago that was all about Apple design, but it started with Jonathan Ive basically joining the group and looked at that era. And I can appreciate the need to focus on a company that has produced so many products over such a period of time. To try to include them all and be comprehensive would be staggering. But that's exactly what this gentleman has decided to do. It is now available. The standard edition is $75, and then there is a special edition, which comes in a case that actually looks like an Apple IIe and costs $300. It is not yet shipping. It will be shortly. So this book is self-published, and I will actually be interviewing Jonathan for the next issue of Juice GS. So maybe we'll play some excerpts of that on a future episode of Open Apple, or you can get the book for yourself, or read the interview in the December issue of Juice GS.
He'd be somebody you'd want to talk to about how the heck he managed to find the time to photograph every single product. That in itself had to be a major undertaking.
Well, one of the questions I have for him is, as you say, his day job is as a mobile app developer, to the best of my understanding. So this is just a little side project he does, shooting 150,000 photos of 600 products and storing them somewhere where his wife won't divorce him for it.
Well, as long as he doesn't do like, what's his name did with, storing his floppies in the oven, the guy who did, Scott Adams. As long as he didn't store the photos in the oven, he's doing okay.
I don't know that story. What happened?
So, well, supposedly when, Scott Adams, did his first game, he actually put the floppies in the oven. I don't know why or how or what, but I guess his wife almost cooked them. It's just one of those funny things, I think, what's his game? Pirate Island?
Sure.
I think that game would have never existed if the floppies had been cooked. So, don't store it in the oven.
I'm pretty sure that was one of the warning labels on the Beagle Bros software.
Well, it was also one of the labels on just about everything at the time.
Right.
Don't put it on the refrigerator. Like the old joke about the lady who keeps calling tech support and saying, well, I put my floppy up every night on the refrigerator with a magnet.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah.
Yeah, those old chestnuts. Well, I don't know what Jonathan is doing with his collection once he has photographed it, but if he wants to get rid of it, there are 9 museums out there, at least, that want your vintage tech. This is a slideshow that was done by my alma mater, Computer World Magazine, but I actually discovered it organically. I was not visiting their site. Last month we talked about the Digital Den, which is launching in Cambridge, Massachusetts, the launch party of which I'm going to this coming weekend. More about that on our next episode. And they were featured in this slideshow and linked all their Indiegogo backers, which includes me, to this slideshow. So this is a story by Daniel Dern at Computer World about if you want to get rid of your old hardware or software, don't throw it in the trash, don't send it to Goodwill. There are actually organizations out there that want it. And he lists some of them, including the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, the Computer History Museum, originally of Boston, as we previously discussed, and now in Mountain View, California, the MIT Museum, which I just walked past yesterday because I work at MIT, and several others, including the Goodwill Computer Museum, actually, that Brendan Roberts talked about in Texas last month on Open Apple. And, of course, the Info Age Museum, which is where VCF East is held. And then Digital Den in Cambridge, and the Living Computer Museum in Seattle, which Peter Neubauer visited for Juice GS a year or so ago. So yeah, don't toss those floppies. I've been doing the same thing myself. I'm unpacking from my last move, and I find some old video games and computer games that I don't want. And so anything that's game related, I put in a little pile, and when it gets big enough, I send it off to the International Center for the History of Electronic Gaming, which is part of the Strong Museum in Rochester, New York. And these guys love this stuff. And even if they don't want it, or they already have 3 or 4 of them, at least you can say that you made an attempt at finding a good home for it, and chances are they're not going to toss it. They'll say, hey, now we have a backup copy, or, oh, we already have 3 or 4 of these, but we know where else to send it.
As long as the material doesn't wind up like what happened with Ishmael and whatnot, where
oh, right.
It gets put in a storage and then somebody else takes over the storage and just sells it off. If you have these materials, just like I do, you want to see these materials digitally recorded at least.
Right.
In some manner accessible to the public.
And even if it's not necessarily put on display, I mean, most museums, the majority of their collection is not on display. Regardless, you can at least say that you donated materials to a museum. I mean, how many people...
That's why I say digital. Digital is the best way to actually preserve it, because there's just way too much to actually ever view.
Right. So we've covered a lot of territory, most of it historical this month, not a lot of new hardware or software to talk about, but we have a couple of gaming items, which used to have its own segment on Open Apple. Let's chat a bit about that. There's a nice article here about how LucasArts fell apart, although I guess it's probably not so nice an article because it's about LucasArts falling apart, which kind of was not good. So Mike, tell us more about this.
Yeah, this is another item that we talked about back when it was announced that Disney was disbanding the LucasArts team. This may only be marginally interesting to Apple II users, but there's a nice wrap-up that goes inside kind of what happened there at the end and why Disney decided not to allow LucasArts to continue to develop Star Wars properties and instead disbanded them. Now, again, at the end there, you got to remember this, of course, is not the LucasArts that we know that created all those great adventure games for 8-bit computers back in the 80s, but still maybe interesting.
Yeah, LucasArts made some great stuff for a variety of platforms, including the Apple II. A lot of their alumni have gone on to Telltale Games, which is best known recently for the Walking Dead game for Xbox, iOS, and a variety of other platforms, which really was just a series of cinematic sequences in which you have minimal input, and yet it won tons of awards, and rightfully so in my opinion, because despite that seemingly not a game nature to it, it was quite gripping, and players felt like they had agency into how the story evolved, which is important. Yeah, so it was April of this year that LucasArts was shuttered, but I can't believe it's already coming up on a year that Disney has owned Lucasfilm, because that happened in December of 2012, and this is the November episode of Open Apple. It still feels staggering to me that one company can own Mickey Mouse, and Winnie the Pooh, and Wolverine, and Luke Skywalker. I mean, I don't want to see that mashup. I don't want to see that crossover.
Well, I think we see a lot of that kind of crossover just from the, recent movies. I mean, you're starting to see the same, J.J. Abrams who directed, Star Trek, going to direct the new Star Wars. How does that work?
With lens flares. That's how it works.
Are we going to see the same kind of dark mood that J.J. brought to the Star Trek movies in the new Star Wars movies? Not that the originals weren't dark, but how far does that go?
I'm more worried about brand dilution myself.
Too much Star Wars is too much of a good thing?
They keep announcing they're going to do standalone movies and these different TV series and this and that. And granted, the Star Wars EU is already very large, but...
And don't forget they animated as well, the Clone Wars series. They're in their season 5 or 6 or 7, whatever it is now.
I'm just worried that, if you start putting too many movies out like that, the stories are going to get watered down. They're just not going to be as interesting.
By the way, what happened to George Lucas's idea for a live-action Star Wars TV show? Is that still happening?
No, it turned out to be far too expensive for ABC. That was a company that he was going to work with.
One last game item. A former guest of the Open Apple Show is Mr. Brian Peachy, sometimes known online as Tenru Nomad, and he's done a variety of fantastic game reviews for eBay, and I haven't actually seen him lately. His videos haven't popped up on my RSS feed from YouTube, and I was wondering what's up with him. So, what do? Drop him an email, ask him how things are going? No, of course not. I stalk him on YouTube. So I pulled up his channel and found the latest video he uploaded was actually about a month ago, so not all that long ago, and I had somehow missed it. And it was the 10 most valuable Apple II games on eBay. And that's not the best games or the most common games. These are the games that go for the most money. And I thought that was a neat thing to think about because we've talked before on the show about how things go for way more than they're worth on eBay, and it's just ridiculous the inflation that some things have. And Brian narrowed that focus specifically to Apple II games, and his findings are interesting, although not all that surprising. Can either of you guess what some of those games might have been?
Well, I mean, Richard Garriott's Akalabeth and probably Ultima 1. Obviously, there's a few others, the same generation that would probably be right there in the list, but
I'm going to say those 2 special Infocom packages, the one with a disc and the one with a mask.
Yep, you got that, and you're both absolutely correct. There were a couple of other games on there, like Online Systems Soft Porn Adventure.
Yeah, there's a big market out there for Sierra collectors for some reason. If you have a title, it doesn't have to be that. It could be almost any of the early titles in really great condition in the original box. You're going to get a couple $100 for it.
It kind of surprises me that we just talk about just the games, but you have to almost talk about the apps too these days because even some of the apps now are starting to draw ungodly money, and I call it the Steve Jobs effect. Everybody thinks that now that Steve Jobs is dead, anything Apple is worth 10 times what it really is worth.
Well, everything Steve Jobs touches gold.
Yes, I think we covered that subject earlier.
Yep.
The God effect.
And speaking of expensive things that Steve Jobs have touched, it looks like Brecker, the German auction house that has sold a couple of Apple ones now, is listing another one. So it's got the handwritten number 46 on the back, which means it's probably one of the Byte Shop originals. It says that it's working. It has its complete packaging and original materials. So this will go for a lot of money.
Are you going to bid?
Sure. I mean, I'll be beaten, but yeah, I'll bid. $10, $20.
Mike, didn't you and I bid on that Castle Wolfenstein painting back in the day?
We did, yeah.
That was spring of 2011, and it went for way more than either of us could have afforded.
Oh, yeah, there was an extra zero at least at the end of that one.
Yeah, but it's so cool to say that we participated in the inflation of that product.
I drove the price up.
I've actually only bid on one Apple I over the years, and that one sold for, if I remember correctly, $15,000.
Such a deal.
And that was one of the early VCF auctions done by Ishmael. You know, just looking at this, and it's like $500,000, $671,000, whatever the amount. There's actually a Japanese collector that owns 3 of these machines. And
well, that's just selfish.
And you know, and then like we were talking earlier, you know, there in California, they just turned on 5 of these machines. How many more of these machines are there? Or are people starting to say, oh, here's Mike's Mimeo, and that's now worth, $50,000. That's the scary thought here.
Well, didn't Mike say when we had him on the show that somebody tried to pass one of his boards off as an original?
Well, that was one of the fears I had, when I started seeing his boards, was that would happen.
I believe Mike's made several very minor changes that you would have to have a real Apple I and know that these changes are in there.
Right. In fact, I believe the Uptronics ones also have a similar type little thing. In fact, that's how Philip Lord got his, was he figured out what the difference was between the Uptronics one and the original.
But this Apple I is scheduled to be auctioned on November 16th and is estimated to fetch between $300,000 and $500,000. And this one is also signed by Woz.
Really? Neat.
Surprise, surprise.
And I'm glad to see that at least Mac Rumors isn't saying that it's serial number 46 anymore. But saying number 46 with quotes around it, because that's what the Byte Shop wrote inventory control numbers on the back of their lot. And those are now being passed off as serial numbers when in fact they're not. Steve Jobs said on a couple of occasions that they never put serial numbers on any of the Apple ones.
Mike Willigo also has a database now that has little tidbits of information like that, about the fact it's not a serial number. But what's amazing to me is, out of 200 units that suddenly his database, is in the 60s, it's kind of has a big departure from the story that Steve Jobs piled him in the corner and had him destroyed. Woz
even mentioned that when Ken, you and I interviewed him, he said something about that number, that original number of just a handful was probably a little bit low. That's what makes this, $500,000 a unit kind of price tag far more outrageous. I would love to have Wendell Sanders' Apple I. That's a nifty machine. Love to see a few more prototypes in that matter. But it'd be amazing to see if he does something like Rich did with the CFFA-1, whether he starts producing these components that he's developed, say, to work with the replica ones or the Mimeo or the Uptronics machines.
Well, I think that brings us to the end of the news section, unless, Bill, you have anything you want to share?
Yeah, back in 2003, actually, it goes back further than that. In 1999, Jim Maricondo and I managed to digitally remaster the Woz Speaks DVD. And at the time, technology was good, but we weren't real pleased with the quality that we got in the DVD. So Brian Weiser and I are actually going back and remastering it and going to try and do a bit of cleanup on it so it appears a bit brighter and clean up the sound a little bit and re-release it. Probably going to be releasing it on iTunes, just because producing DVDs these days seems almost to be self-defeating.
Or quaint at best.
Yeah, quaint. I mean, there will be a limited run of DVDs, but at this point, our plan is more to make it available through iTunes so that we can put it out to a wider audience. And, the time frame of that video is just right after his plane crash. So the fact that Woz was able to speak to a group at that time and have very consistent message throughout it was pretty amazing, considering 5 months earlier he was in that plane crash. It's a fun video to watch. You find some things that you hadn't seen before of Woz. The fact that it's 1981 is a huge thing. I don't think any video really exists of that time frame of him. And we're saying spring of next year is when we're going to release it.
I can't wait to see it.
The Woz Speaks DVD actually is Woz coming to APPLE in Seattle in 1981, one of our user group meetings. And he spends an hour and 20 minutes talking about different things that Apple was doing. Obviously, his joke about SubLogic and his airplane crash is in there. It's quite humorous to listen to him talk about that. But as of yet, I haven't seen anybody actually try and hook their flight simulator up to their real airplane. It's quite a humorous hour and 20 minutes. He answers questions from some people in the audience and gives you a good insight into the early days of Apple.
Awesome. I'd like to see that. Well, it's nice to know that Call-A.P.P.L.E has some new products coming out, and I understand you have another recent product that you're plugging. Let's talk a bit more about that.
Old or new, it's still cool in Retro Views.
So there is one big news item that we did not discuss in this evening's news, and that is because we want to save the best for last, and we have a special guest joining us, and we don't just mean Bill. He's special enough on his own, but even specialer is having Bill and Mr. Brian Weiser on the air. Hi, Brian.
Hi, Ken and Mike.
Now, Brian, of course, you are an alumnus of this show, so you've done this before, but today we have you on with Bill to talk about your latest product, that being, as every KansasFest attendee knows, and hopefully more than just that, is the WOZPAK Special Edition.
Yeah, we're really excited to have been able to release that at KansasFest with Woz. It's been practically a year-long collaboration between me and Bill, and we should probably, I know I'm just joining at this point, but we probably should have Bill say a little something about it, since he was there in the early days and knows the background history of it before we get into what it is now.
Yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about what the original WOZPAK was, because for some of us youngins in the community, we may not have been familiar with the original product. Bill?
Well, it originated out of a funny story that Woz tells about then CEO Mike Scott running through the office late one night, scrambling through people's desks, pulling any documentation that he could find, throwing it all together on the copy machine and sending it off to Seattle to APPLE founder Val Golding. And of course we get this package and half of the documentation isn't readable, but being as Mike Scott wants it out to everybody and anybody that we could get it out to, we go ahead and put it together in a 300-page menagerie of documentation that mostly only the technical types would have understood. But at the time, there really wasn't much else for the Apple II. In doing that, a lot of people had a lot of questions. There were a lot of handwritten pieces in there and pretty much unreadable. And so the WOZPAK 2 got produced. WOZPAK 2 is what most people are familiar with. That was typeset by Bob Clardy, along with a few other folks in early APPLE days. But that document really had a number of things in there that became the backbone of what most programmers use as a reference for the Apple II, the Sweet 16 information, floating point information. All that is in there. And I started talking about doing this some 3 years ago. We didn't really foresee that it would become anything more than a PDF. However, sending it all off to Brian in December of last year, and about February going, Brian, are we ready to put out a PDF yet? And him saying, not yet, not yet, not yet. We kind of started thinking, okay, this is bigger than what we expected.
Well, yeah, that's to put it mildly. So, when Bill asked me to, put my Photoshop skills to the test and, resuscitate these old documents. I mean, the originals that were in the WOZPAK, from, the 1970s, the originals that APPLE worked from were already multi-generational photocopies and faxes, so they were already unreadable as the original documents back then. And so what I did is went through page by page, letter by letter, doing digital forensics and reconstruction, literally connecting the dots. So, some of the photocopies you could see, if you connect that dot and this dot and that dot, that would make the letter A. Well, so I actually would go in and connect the dots, or we figured out what certain words were after, much looking, and would actually go and copy some of Woz's handwriting from another section of the book, but, scale it and rotate it appropriately to make it fit. So, it was a lot more restoration than I had originally anticipated. There are different levels of restoration. On one hand, you could just do a simple crop white balance and put a title on it and be done. And that's what I was originally thinking of doing, when I volunteered to help. But as Bill said, as the project progressed and, we talked to Woz about it, and Bill can say more about that in a second, just with Woz's enthusiasm. And it's like, we probably should take this to another level and make it even better, which is the letter by letter restoration I was talking about. It's like, we could put this out as is, but wouldn't it be nice if all these 50, 60, 70 pages, you could actually read what it says for the first time? Or personally, my main motivation for deciding to take it to the next level with the insane number of hours that were put into this, Woz was always a hero of mine growing up, and still, of course. And I just wanted to do something nice for him in my attempt to give back. And that was my personal motivation to justify, 8 months of digital hell. I probably could forge Woz's handwriting better than most at this point.
That's a little scary skill to have.
Yeah, not something you need every day, but
I've told him that a few times, so it's nothing new there. But it's really Woz. I mean, when I met with Woz in March or April there this year, he was so enthusiastic about it. I mean, as he flipped through the original WOZPAK, it was like, I can't believe that I did all this. And, for him to be amazed by his own work, he has to tell you just really how in-depth it really was. And one of the things that I found in the original WOZPAK, and this is something that a lot of people don't realize, is most companies' cassette interfaces at the time were like 300 baud. And it was no better than having an old teletype. But his was actually 1200 baud. And the way he did this and accomplished that, to read through it's just amazing. And you get an idea of really how cutting edge that interface was, in spite of the fact that it's just a cassette interface. Most people think of a cassette, just a simple tape, it's going to wear out. But the fact that he was able to do things in half the time or quarter of the time that other companies were struggling with, it's just phenomenal. But that kind of enthusiasm that he had really drove us more to get this done. And obviously K-Fest is always a kind of a stop point for most of us doing projects in the Apple II realm. And we just kept pushing and pushing, thinking, we'll finish it in time. And then it's like, the last few nights were, 1 hour of sleep here and there, doing notes back and forth on iPhones. It was quite an undertaking, especially after all the hundreds of hours we put into, as Brian said, deciphering Woz's handwriting. But it was quite a fun project. And the end result is just phenomenal, compared to what we had originally.
And beyond, beyond just the digital restoration and wanting to take it to the next level, Bill went ahead and secured forwards from Steve Wozniak, Randy Wigginton, who we all saw at KansasFest, Andy Hertzfeld, Keith Walls, Robert Clardy, and Wendell Sander, just to add some perspective on what the WOZPAK meant then and means now, and the early days of Apple. And then Bill and I also co-wrote an introduction, and then I guess the final dressing was the cover. Wanted to upgrade the look of the cover from the original kind of muted red that the original WOZPAK was. And so I went to the original Apple EPS, that isn't generally available, and duplicated the red, the yellow, and the blue from the Apple logo just to, make it a little more retro feel. So, we've included a few things like that in the book.
Now, do you see this as a historical document, or is it more of a practical reference for today's Apple programmers?
Yes.
I agree. I absolutely concur.
It's really an art book.
It is an art book, but it's also a heritage book. For those people who are digging back through the original Apple IIs now, and Mike Willigal, who you've had on the show, has been one of the foremost people doing that. It's that information in there is actually very relevant because it applies. It's just that in this day of emulators, unless you've got an Apple II configuration, it's probably not going to apply too much. So in that case, it would be more of an art book.
I mean, for me, I do have a programming background, certainly not on Bill's level. So I can certainly make sense of a lot of what's discussed in there. For me, the forwards reading from Woz and the others who wrote forwards for it, I find that part interesting. I guess you could think of it as a little novelette as far as reading some thoughts from these people about the time, and just going through and seeing Woz's handwriting. And as far as the restoration, again, I should mention, while there was a lot of fixing and correcting, I also didn't want to overcorrect, so intentionally left, flaws in there and things. I try to find a good balance so it still has the retro feel while actually being readable.
What kind of flaws are you referring to?
Things like a lot of the paper Woz used was graph paper. And so the original documents I was working with, you could see the little square crosshatches in the background. Well, I removed most of those so you could actually read the text that was there, but maybe I'd preserve the outline of that graph paper on some of the pages, or the different letters. I didn't fill in all the little holes. I might fill in a lot of them, but, it still looks like an old dot matrix printout, or it still looks like handwriting. So, like I said, it's a fine balance between making something readable, which in a lot of cases it wasn't, and not taking away from the historical document that it is.
One of the things, too, that Woz did was he would write certain letters 3 or 4 or 5 different ways, and you just had to look at the document and see that day which way he was writing it. That may have been fatigue. That may have been just being harried and writing it.
Are you sure it wasn't Brian faking Woz's signature?
Well, I was channeling Woz. No, Woz is awesome. I probably should mention too, for people that weren't at KansasFest, because Woz unexpectedly showed up. Sadly, Bill couldn't be there, but I did have the great privilege of announcing this with Woz. So that was very surrealistic. I'm announcing the new rebirth of his book, our book. It was one of those life moments you just don't forget. So Woz stood up and talked about it, and that was so surreal. I'll never forget it. But I should mention too, with the content of the book, there are things as well that were not in the original WOZPAK and WOZPAK II. For example, there's an Apple I section. That's brand new, from Woz. And,
when you say it's brand new, you mean it was previously written in the 70s, but he just never published it or distributed it?
Correct.
That's correct. And,
Gotcha.
Randy contributed some items in that respect too. And these are just, items that were written by Woz, but it's just like when Mike was scrambling for this documentation, he was grabbing anything and everything. And you can imagine that he was overlooking certain items, that should have gone in. We felt, we needed to include something of the Apple I because when you talk about, the beast that was the Apple II and just how in depth it really is, it came from that Apple I realm. And I think, it's just, the way that some of these people like, Rich Dreher and all these guys have, managed to take the hardware and expand it so much further. It shows how open it was. And just the fact that it started from that Apple I and that open platform continued in the Apple II. It really shows that this is the ultimate ultimate open platform. You can do almost anything with it.
Yeah, that's why we love the Apple II.
Absolutely.
That's why people like Rich Dreher today are producing all these amazing adapters for it. And it's an Apple II, but it has so much potential even today.
Well, and there were examples back in the 80s too. We talk about, running railroads. This was something that was near and dear to Val Golding's heart, was running his railroads with the Apple II, or is it the A10 lighting system that switches on and off your lights? There was a whole setup for that as well. There's just a lot of potential for this old machine, and this book really highlights where a lot of this came from, and the fact that real structure didn't change a whole lot, but the potential just has been exponential over the years.
So how have sales been in the first few months?
They've been okay. We expected the K-Fest push. We got a lot from that. It just, we haven't really pushed on it too hard because we wanted to actually wait until we were on here and talk about the book. The fact that it is an Apple II book, generally people who are interested in that time frame are the ones buying it. There are a few people who only want it for, as you specified earlier, an art type book. They want something that shows that Apple II in the 70s. And so, they've been brisk. It's not, it's not been lousy. So it's actually been, quite pleasing. And the great thing is, we've been able to share this book with, all those, contributors who, wrote the forwards for the book. And each one of them has written, little notes and is going, wow, this, it's really nice to hold it because it's a real book. It's not a PDF. And if we'd stuck to our original plan of just doing the PDF, you wouldn't have that experience.
Now, not only did you evolve it from a PDF into a book, but you actually abandoned the PDF option because right now this is hard copy only.
That is correct. We have no plans at this time for a PDF.
And why is that?
Because we feel that, there's enough information out there on the Apple II in PDF form. This is something that really people have to hold in their hands and experience that for the first time. It's like this rush to go to digital in this day and age, the actual joy of holding a book and opening it and flipping the pages has been lost on a lot of people. But we wanted to just kind of take a step back and say, no, this is something that people have to see in hard copy form.
Plus, if you were looking at old dot matrix printouts or someone's handwriting like Woz, it's nice to see printouts and handwriting on actual paper. So it just feels more real, much like Juice.js or the new Apple book that was just announced with all of the photos. Those are best appreciated in print form.
You're preaching to the choir, brother.
Hey, can I sidetrack for just a quick sec? Cause I have to be a geek of a different caliber. When Bill was mentioning, when we sent copies out to, the VIPs who contributed forwards and just getting some emails back, I got one totally unexpected email back from Bob Clardy, and he said, "By the way, I've been a Firefly fan for a decade and just recently rewatched Done the Impossible. Woohoo, brown coats rule." I was totally not expecting a Firefly fan from such an Apple alumni, so.
Well, I'm not surprised. As I mentioned in my Juice.js article about KansasFest, the ability to become passionate about very esoteric topics is sort of a hallmark of the KansasFest crowd. So the fact that an Apple II user would be a Firefly fan as well doesn't really surprise me.
It's just cool to see these guys on another level of geekdom besides the computer technology. So
I have two questions. One, Brian, you had mentioned that at KansasFest, of course, you were able to introduce the book with Woz. Did you get video of that, and will that be available for people who weren't there to see at any time?
Excellent question. I did get video, and I hadn't thought of making it available, but certainly can do.
Why would you not make that available, sir? You should put that right on your WOZPAK website. I mean, this is an official endorsement in person with Woz.
That's a darn good point. In fact, come to think of it, I haven't even shared it with Bill, so.
Yes, Brian, come to think of it.
I would think that would be an excellent advertising tool.
Yeah.
We have the photos from the introduction, which is generally what we've used for the marketing campaign. But as far as video, it's the first I hear about it.
I will tell you, too, I don't normally get starstruck because I see a lot of stars at the different conventions I go to.
Well, heck, you are a star now.
Oh, well. Thanks. But I was just so caught up in the moment with Woz that I made sure to get a photo with me and Woz and Randy holding the book. But I totally spaced off. Wait a minute, I probably should get a photo of just Woz and Randy holding the book. So it was, I wasn't at my most brilliant necessarily, but, yeah, there is video, and I'm probably not completely appalling in it, so it's probably safe to put online. But thanks for the reminder.
Was that Jeff Blakeney who shot that video?
Yes.
Cool.
The other question that I had for you, Brian, since you've gotten so good at forging Woz's autograph, I have a whole pile of Apple II stuff that I want to move on eBay that if you could just sign some of the cases and stuff, that'd be great.
I knew this was coming.
I'm very happy to do that. If you can just send those items to me, and I promise to get them back to you sometime. Yeah, sometime.
Except Mike, you'll probably have to buy them off Brian on eBay.
Yeah, that's what I'm kind of worried about now.
Cool.
No one could replace Woz. He's our favorite geek.
Yeah, he still matters both to the Apple II crowd and to the IT crowd in general.
That is definite. That is for sure. I mean, he's still running around the world, and every time people see him, they're snapping up photos and saying, here's my Apple II lid. And that sort of happened with my lunch with him. I took along Philip Lord, who most people on the CSA2 know as Nama. And he brought along an original first 100 Apple II lid for Woz to sign. So, you know, and Woz has always been very gracious in signing things, and, you know, we should always mention that, you know, that kind of thing is just really appreciated. I'm glad that he was able to be part of this project with us, and you know, he, as always, graciously gave of his time in writing the foreword. The foreword actually, you know, I find it very interesting because there's always little tidbits in each thing that he does that's new and something you didn't see before. And The introduction in the WOZPAK by Woz is another one of those instances.
So we've been talking about this wonderful book that we know is available in hard copy but not PDF, but where do people go to get the book?
Well, they go to wozpak.callapple.org. That's WOZPAK.callapple.org. And there's a link on the website which links to our publisher, lulu.com, and they can get it there now for I believe it is $44.95.
Now, with all the interest in early Apple, ever since Steve Jobs passed away and with the movie having just come out, I know this obviously is not a Steve Jobs book, it's a Steve Wozniak book, but did you consider that there might be any interest from a major publisher in putting this book on Barnes & Noble store shelves and the like?
We actually already have it on Barnes & Noble and Amazon and other bookstores. The idea that it was somehow related to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was there. Steve Jobs was part of Apple, but we wanted to focus this one on, purely on the fact that it was Woz who was the hardware geek who really designed all this hardware originally. The focus of the book being on Woz, or the bits from Randy and Wendell Sander and the other contributors. This is purely the engineering side, and Jobs to me was always on the marketing side. So from that aspect, we prefer to keep this more towards a Woz specific item.
Absolutely. I think that's a more accurate representation of the work, sure.
And, self-publishing is certainly, easy, I guess, is a relative term, but it's certainly an easy, quicker way to release the book to the public than tracking down a publisher, which is no simple task.
Yep.
Now, maybe someone will approach us, but right now we're self-publishing through Lulu.
And by the time we published, we had already put 8 months plus into this book. So, if we had gone out and searched out a publisher, that may have added months or even longer to the project, and we definitely would not have seen it at K-Fest.
Now, in the 30 years between when the original WOZPAK came out and the special edition came out, was the original WOZPAK scanned and put into archive.org or callapple.org or anything like that? Was it available?
No, the original WOZPAK never was available online. I have the only scans. Well, I take that back. Brian and I both, we have the only copies of the original WOZPAK in scan form that are available. And there is no actual PDF of those scans.
Excellent. So that makes the new book all the more valuable, because not only have you invested in improving the quality of it, but you've really made available something that has been inaccessible for decades, which is fantastic.
Well, that's definitely, it's been finding one of them, and I only know of 5 of the original copies in my search over the years. It's just one of those rare items that expands on, the Apple II infrastructure so much more than a lot of the books that we see that were, off the counter type books.
It's definitely been a great experience bringing back a historical document back to today, where people can enjoy it and see it for the first time.
Yeah. And it's been a great experience having you on the show to talk about it. Thanks so much for this behind-the-scenes look at the WOZPAK Special Edition.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah. And unless there is anything else that anybody is overlooking, I think that's the end of our show this evening.
Well, see you later, and thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was great that we were able to coordinate this. We're calling from 3 different time zones. I'm on the east coast of the USA. Brian and Mike are in the mountain time, and Bill, you're in the Japan Standard Time?
That is correct. JST, Japan Standard Time. We don't have daylight savings here.
Yeah, you're too smart for that. So.
Well, we like to think so, but
yeah. Excellent. Well, we look forward to seeing you online, and we hope that the four of us can get together at KansasFest in a future year.
Definitely.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Wouldn't miss it.
All right. Thanks, guys. We'll see you online.
Thanks.
See you, everybody.
Bye.
This has been the Open Apple Podcast. Find more episodes, read our blog, or send feedback by visiting us on the web at www.open-apple.net.
At Calgary Comic Expo on April 27, 2013, Jennifer Blackmore asked Will Wheaton to record a message to her yet unborn daughter to be played in the future to explain to her why it is awesome to be a nerd. Here is the audio from that session. A link to the video will be in the show notes.
My name is Will Wheaton. It's 2013, and you've just recently joined us on planet Earth. So welcome. I'm an actor, and I'm a writer, and I'm a dad. And your mother asked me to tell you why it's awesome to be a nerd. And that's an easy thing for me to do because that's who I am. I don't know what the world's going to be like by the time you understand this. I don't know what it's going to mean to be a nerd when you are a young woman. For me, when I was growing up, being a nerd meant that I liked things that were a little weird, that took a lot of effort to appreciate and understand. It meant that I loved science, and I loved playing board games and reading books and really understanding what went on in the world instead of just kind of riding the planet through space. And when I was a little boy, people really teased us about that and made us feel like there was something wrong with us for loving those things. Now that I'm an adult, I'm kind of a professional nerd, and the world has changed a lot. And I think a lot of us have realized that being a nerd, or being a geek is another word you'll hear, and I sort of use the terms interchangeably. It's not about what you love. It's about how you love it. So there's going to be a thing in your life that you love, and I don't know what it's going to be. It might be sports, it might be science, it might be reading, it might be fashion design, it might be building things, it might be telling stories or painting pictures. It doesn't matter what it is. The way you love that, and the way that you find other people who love it the way you do, is what makes being a nerd awesome. The defining characteristic of us, the people in this room, and I'm going to ask your mom to turn this camera around in a minute. Go there, go Mom. The defining characteristic that ties us all together is that we love things. And some of us love Firefly. And some of us love Game of Thrones. And some of us love... These are things that you'll be able to go see there in your history book. Some of us love Star Trek or Star Wars or anime or games or fantasy or science fiction. Some of us love completely different things, but we all love those things so much that we travel for thousands of miles, which is probably easy for you, but it's still... We're still on fossil fuels. I don't know what you're going to do. But it's difficult. We come from all over, in some cases all over the world, so that we can be around people who love the things that we love the way that we love them. And that's why being a nerd is awesome. And don't ever let anybody tell you that that thing that you love is a thing that you can't love. Don't ever let anyone tell you you can't love that, that's for boys. You have to love this because you're a girl. You find the things that you love, and you love them the most that you can. And listen, this is really important. I want you to be honest, honorable, kind. I want you to work hard, because everything worth doing is hard. And I want you to be awesome. And I'm going to do my very best to leave you a planet that you can still live on.